gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I have a very special guest on my pod. I have Mabel Holland. How are you doing today, Mabel?
Doing okay. How about
Uh,
yourself?
I'm doing all right. Why don't you give us the lowdown of who you are, and then we're going to get on to your game, which I'm so excited about.
I'm a game designer. My wife Mary and I run the company Holland. We make games.
Yes, you do. And you're here to talk about a very specific game. So, y'all, I really only care about solo games except this one because Mabel is making a game about the Council of Nicaea. So, Mabel, do you want to give us like the quick rundown of what this game is going to be like?
Sure. So Nicaea is a game for 4 to 6 players, um, which I'm essentially describing as kind of like a stock game, but about theology. So you are all playing early church fathers, and you all have different opinions on different doctrinal disputes, and you're trying to sort it out because at this point in church history, um, you know, Christianity isn't being persecuted. Um, Constantine's all like, "Yay, this is good. I'm going to use this to unify my empire." And so we had everyone on the same page with one kind of religion. And then they start having these really nerdy arguments that no one else really cares about. And it says, you know what, you guys got to figure this out. I don't care what it is, just figure it out. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what is real and what is heterodox. And we're doing that by investing ourselves in these doctrinal positions, and essentially whichever side of a dispute um, has more people behind it, turns out that was the right one, and everyone gets on board. So you are trying to have the most shares, as it were, in the most correct doctrinal positions, unless at the end of the game you have the least in all that, but you have the most influence, causing a schism. Ah! So that's essentially the crux of the game. It's not a detailed simulation. Um, it's more just looking at this as um, because there's a tendency to look at, especially when you're looking at church history, to look at it as, here are these infallible people who were pure and good. And the thing is, people generally throughout history are people. Like human nature doesn't change all that much. And so the game's also trying to get at the fact that these are people, these are mortal men making these decisions, um, to also try to maintain their own position and influence within the church. Because if you feel, you know what, Arianism is good and this is the right thing, and everyone else says no, it's not, then you're no longer going to be part of the church. So you need to toe that line. So it's really looking at those dynamics and just saying, hey, these are people and these decisions are made by human beings with some
Right.
jokes.
Yes, with jokes. We are going to get to that. So, the other thing that I think is kind of fun is I actually really, as a church historian, really like the way that you divided up the issues at hand. Do you want to run down that list or do you want me to do it?
I can run down that list. So let's see. It's actually been a while since I was working on it. So
That's why I offered.
I understand. So the first 3 issues are basically the big points of Arianism. As far as it was the son of the same substance of the Father. It was the son co-eternal with the Father. Was the son subordinate to the Father? And to a lot of people, those three issues, like to normal people, if you ask normal people these questions, um, a lot of them tend to come down to like the Arian belief because it makes more sense. But then those beliefs also, and this is why they were so popular and continue to be popular even after the Council of Nicaea. I mean, you look at Arianism still being in the Eastern Church for a bit after that, and um, like when the Germanic peoples converted, a lot of them converted to an Arian version of the faith. Um, because it makes more sense that the son would be born after the father and not exist always and forever at the same time.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Oh, so just to give everybody some context, people spend a lot of time wringing their hands about this. So when we think of Christianity, you think, oh, there's a Trinity. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty. We believe in one Son, the only Son of God. Blah blah blah. Not to be dismissive, but no one needs to hear the whole thing. But people spent a lot of time deciding this sort of creedal stuff before it actually happened. And so people were like, okay, how can Jesus be divine? Are we being polytheistic here? No, 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 no. We can't do that. So how do we have the Son and the Father together? And so people are arguing, okay, so is it like Jesus is like a Kinder egg with like a human chocolate exterior and like a God toy inside? Or is it like a latte where like the substances are mixed? And so like you mix human and divine to make like a mixture? How do you do this? And so people took this very seriously, and people died over this. There were
Mhm.
riots over this. People's careers were ruined over their beliefs about this. And so, yeah, I mean, these issues are just to us, they seem kind of distant, but for these
Yeah,
people, this was like the news of the day.
yeah, and I'm also, and for people who are lay people in the church, the common Roman citizen, they they usually don't really care which it is, as much as like the educated people did who would think about the implications of this or that. Um, and really, I think that was the big dispute that really created the need for the Council of Nicaea. Uh, the other two disputes, big major issues that are represented in the game, is w- when is Easter, which is a long standing question for a while for the church. And then I think the fifth one was whether or not to forgive the Meletians,
Yes.
which were a schism, a sect.
Yeah. And what's interesting is even our information about them is somewhat questionable. But
Mhm.
essentially, part of what a lot of this actually does boil down to, and you're right, is politics. So, one of the reasons the Goths end up being more Arian inclined is because Constantine's own son, Constantius, was also like a semi Arian who had contact with the king of the Goths. And so you end up with all these like chain reactions. And even the Meletian heresy schism is very much based in fighting over what part of the world has the most powerful bishops. Who do we listen to? Who has control over the Church of Alexandria? Because Meletius got in trouble in part because he was supposed to stand in for bishops who were in jail during a persecution, and promoted some people that maybe he wasn't supposed to. And power really is at the heart of all of this. So how did you decide that this was a topic that you wanted to make a whole game about?
Well, I've always been interested in church history from a very early age. I was a very religious child. Like my favorite thing was going to church. I loved going to church so much that my great grandparents would pick me up every Sunday morning and every Wednesday evening to go to church with them. No one else in my family was doing that. That was like, this is my thing I wanted to do. My brother, He was in sports. He was in wrestling and baseball. I was in Bible quizzing, which um like that was that was my safe place, was the church, really. I think because I was a fairly isolated child. I didn't really fit in with most people and with my family, and so I kind of escaped. And some of that was reading fantasy books and comics, and some of it was the church. Like when I was real little, I'd pretend to be in King Arthur times, or I'd pretend to be an X Man, or I'd pretend to be one of the disciples. I mean, that was the kind of kid I was. I kind of drifted away from that as I got older. Um, I mean, really, I spent a lot of time like obsessively, manically religious. Um, and I think part of the appeal was, well, here is this book with all these rules. I can follow all these rules. I remember spending a week where I had memorized everything that I thought was a sin, and I told the pastor at the end of the week, I went through this whole week without any sins, and they're like, "Mm-mm, sin of pride." Like, no. Um, so I mean that was me as a kid, and I was also pretty insufferable going around trying to convert people, like one of those kids. Um, and again, so by the time I hit puberty, I kind of fell away from the church a lot. And that wasn't really a kind of like, oh, I've hit puberty. The sin stuff sounds pretty good now. It wasn't that. It was more just feeling really isolated and not really understanding what was wrong with me. Took me a while to figure that out. um, but that kind of gave me the sense that, like, you know, God made me wrong or something. And eventually, when I was 18, my dad died. He was 38, and I had this whole period where, like, well, I'm definitely an atheist now, and you know what? I'm going to do all the sins. See how you like it. But I was afraid of getting in trouble, so I kind of didn't do it that much. But and then in my adult life, I've kind of gone back and forth uh, with my faith, and a lot of
Mhm.
that also has been about reading more about church history, because a lot of reading into church history as a kid, well, is written by church historians who politically are telling a certain story they want to tell. The Eusebius writing about the Council of Nicaea isn't going to be dishy, or make it seem like there was all this stuff going on that there probably was going on. It's kind of sanitized. And then just realizing, that a lot of the texts that we have, they're written by people, rewritten by people, edited, translated, changed to further the cultural norms of that time. And uh, and it's kind of that kind of acknowledgement and that knowledge kind of got me thinking a lot more about church history again. Um, Especially lately. I was casting around for a project, and I thought, well, this could be a neat project, and that's kind of where it came from. That was kind of a rambly answer, but that's the answer I have.
That's good. I like this. And yeah, actually, I was thinking about this. Like, you got me thinking about stuff that I haven't gotten to enjoy in a while. Even the history really does get revised. So the reason that Eusebius doesn't want to be too dishy is that both Eusebius of Caesarea, who ends up being super tight with Constantine, and Eusebius of Nicomedia, who ends up baptizing Constantine, who waits to get baptized until the end of his life because he plans to do lots of really naughty things and does so. They were both Arian, and kind of walk their way back enough to remain politically relevant. And what's really interesting is that some later accounts change the identity of who baptized Constantine in order to make it somebody who is more obviously anti-Arian. So I don't think we actually explained this before, but so the Nicene, the Council of Nicaea basically figures out how to make the the substance of the Father and the Son the same, and it's saying basically that the Father and the Son are both equally God. Arius saw Jesus as a slightly lesser being, at least in some descriptions. So someone who came after, someone who's a little different, somebody who was created, as opposed to somebody who, in the beginning was the Word, and etc. So, what kind of research did you end up doing to contribute to this game? Because this is very well researched. You picked up a lot. Like, this is just a really good boiling down. Actually, if I was teaching a class, I would include a lot of this, most of this.
So a lot of it really, despite those sources being written by people with agendas, was looking at primary sources. I had to get some books on interlibrary loan because turns out my library doesn't carry this ancient church history stuff.
What?
Yeah, I know. And then a lot of it was just because I had some slight background in it previously. It was more just like, okay, refreshing for details and oh, here are some names that are important. Because one thing about the game, um, while it's about these disputes, it's not about the substance of the disputes, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
It doesn't like in the game, you could have an Aryan position on one issue and an anti-Aryan position on another. And in the game, that's fine. They're treated as fungible because the kind of premise is whatever way this is decided is what they're going to say is the way it is. From Constantine's point of view, it doesn't matter which one it is. He's not someone like like to a degree like Charlemagne would get kind of more involved in what's real here, and Constantine was like,
Yeah.
I don't care, just figure something out. So they're treated as fungible, and to a degree, the church fathers are treated as fungible. Because in the game, you're going to score extra points for church fathers you have influence with. You have their cards basically, who you're on the right side of the issues that matter to them, which are kind of arbitrary because all the issues really mattered to all of them. So I'm just kind of parceling them out almost mathematically. And, you have guys who are strong anti-Arians, but, if at the Council of Nicaea, the Arian position had been cemented, then we would remember them now as being very strong Arians, you know? So that's treated as fungible. So I didn't need to do the same level or detail of research that someone might do if their game cared more about the substance of the arguments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And the other thing is, frankly, I don't think that most people care as much as somebody like I would about the substance of those arguments. You have to draw the line between educational and fun.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure like the fun line is pretty far from where I would take it myself. So, so how did you decide what figures to put in and which ones to keep out?
Well, I started with a list of like all the important dudes because they're all dudes.
Of course, of course.
And then I looked, okay, which ones can I find public domain images of? Okay, you got a card. I can't find this one. Well, you don't have a card. So I mean, really, it was as simple as that. It was really as because the thing is because we design games to publish ourselves. That kind of stuff can be a consideration. Like I think you asked me about before the interview about the other Eusebius. So I only have one of the Eusebii in the game, and obviously a game is better if it has two Eusebiuses. But I couldn't find a a picture of him. So I was like, you know what? I'll go with this guy.
No, we gotta find a picture of. So you see, me, so Nicaea is my man. Like, I'll be really sad not to have him in the game, but it is what it is. But yeah, that's actually really interesting, especially because I actually wonder if that had an impact. So it seems to me like I made a list and went through. A lot of these people that did make it into the game are team not Arius, and
Yes.
I think that might be actually a public domain image thing, in addition to the fact that historically everybody wants to be on the winning side, because the people who are saints and who you have pictures of tend to be the people who were correct. So how do you think that that impacts like the representation in the game?
It absolutely does. I would like to have it more balanced, I guess. Have more of the more famous Aryans, but they did not get icons made of them. Like a lot of the images I used. I mean, they're icons, and they're gorgeous. I love that whole style, but no one did that for the bad guys because they're not cool enough. Like I think Arius himself, I ended up using a woodcut because that's all we really had, and that's woodcut from
Yeah.
I think much later. Obviously, and uh, if we were a bigger company with more
Hmm.
money for art, we probably would try to find some way to commission icons of these people because I'm done in that style. But we don't have
Yeah.
that money. And I think because the 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 personalities, much like the issues, are treated as somewhat fungible, it wasn't as
Hmm.
crucial as something like my game The Vote, which is about uh, suffrage movement. I have kind of equal cards for people who are on the right side, people who are on the wrong side, and because it's about that contest where I'm playing one side, you're playing the other side. I did feel like I needed more of that sense of a balance or parity between the sides. Um, Whereas here, where every church father could turn out to be Aryan at the end if that's how everyone as a group decides the thing goes. I wasn't as concerned about it.
No, it makes sense. It's just one of the historical interest aspects of it. The other thing you included I thought was super interesting was it's not all church fathers that have influence from that deck. You also had some sort of minor issues that came in. What made you decide to add those, and how did you choose them?
So the minor issues, so those are like the bits of canon law that were settled, and it was like this is also what happened there, and I wanted something that was another way for someone to score points and whatnot. And I want to say there were 20 cannons in Nicaea. And so I think I picked the ones that seemed like the best ones. Basically, the ones that were the most interesting or gave me the best punchlines. A couple of them don't have punchlines, but they're still interesting. So I kept them in. Most of them have some kind of humor in them. Um, and one of them started funny, and then my cool friend, Dr. Liz Davidson, made it funnier. So I'm thank you for that.
Yes. So one of the card texts is going to change based on my castration joke. So there you go.
Mhm.
So yeah, some of the issues they're covering here, just for those of you who are listening, we have cards that are about being against self castration, against usury because that worked. Things about ancient privileges of bishops, against kneeling, which we're going to come back to. Um, and then also talking about the lapsy, and so basically because this is happening in a period that's after a time of fairly intense persecution, maybe not so much in the Western Empire, but in the Eastern Empire, you have people who basically become apostates and say, I'm not Christian, I'm not Christian, don't kill me. But then when things slow back down and it's safer to be Christian again, they want to come back. And there are people who are like, no, we held out and we were strong and you are weak of faith. You don't deserve this. And, other people who are like, let's do the Christian thing and be merciful. And so there's like an entire conflict about that as well that makes an appearance. But we should talk about the tone of this particular game. This game has a fairly irreverent tone.
Yeah.
What made you choose to do it this way?
I think because the premise of the game itself is, this is not as holy as people would like to portray it as being, because people, again, are essentially people. They are scrapping around for political influence, and it's so inherently not divine but profane. And I thought that having a more humorous tone would assist with that. Now, I've done kind of irreverent tone in some of my games before. Usually in the rule books and usually just kind of in passing in the historical material. Now, there are some games that's not appropriate for, like when I did This Guilty Land, it's like, okay, this is not, there's no jokes in this one. Not,
Right.
Whereas, I'll work little jokes into some of the rules of my games. And so I felt like that fit here. Because the game itself, in a way, is kind of blowing a raspberry. It makes sense for the text of the game to also be blowing that raspberry.
I personally love it and do not disagree. So just so those of you at home know what I'm talking about, here's the current introduction. So Mabel, I know you could change it, but for now, the current draft rules say it's the year 325 and it's a pretty chill time to be a Christian. Not only has it been a hot minute since they were forced to renounce their faith on pain of death, but the Emperor Constantine has really leaned into it, hoping it will unite the often fractured Roman Empire. So the big guy isn't super thrilled when bishops immediately get into nitpicky, esoteric arguments that John Quintus Romanus doesn't give two flips about. These controversies, particularly around the teachings of Arius, threaten to splinter the new faith and disrupt the fragile peace Constantine has established after 20 years of war. He demands that the bishops gather together in the city of Nicaea to come to an accord. He doesn't really care what these nerds decide, so long as there's consensus. What I like about it, I mean, it's not wrong. Where's the lie, historically? But what made you choose to be very colloquial about it? I know that a lot of people who do historical games feel that there should be some gravitas, but I don't think that has to be the case, personally. Where are you coming to this from?
So I mean, I understand the gravitas argument. I understand the argument for the rules reinforcing the theme of the game. There was a game that we released last year called The Field of the Cloth of Gold. And it's a two-player game, and the rules are written in kind of a pastiche of 1500s English. I mean, it's not. We didn't go too far with it where we're actually writing in the English and spellings of us that time, because
Right.
that'd be obnoxious. But we wrote in a particular flavor, in a particular way, to reinforce the theme. And so I understand the idea of reinforcing that theme with gravitas, but this, because the approach is irreverent, the
Mm-hmm.
colloquial nature of it, I think, is reinforcing the theme. It just may not be the way other people want that theme to be approached. And I definitely have heard that from folks. I uh, so I have received over the course of being a game designer 3 death threats. Third one's Nicaea. Usually they wait until the game's about to come out, but this one came way earlier. Not super thrilled about the tone, but you know what? I guess they're just really excited about it. I mean, I am too. It's excited. I'm excited for this game. Yeah, so I don't feel gravitas necessarily is necessary. I think it depends what you're trying to do tonally with the game, what your approach is, and what you're trying to convey. I think also one thing I try to remember is that every time you engage with history, the thing you're producing is the story of 2 times in cultures. It's the time and culture in which the events took place, and the time and culture in which the thing is being made. So for me, that kind of anachronism, colloquialism, gives it some energy and some verve, and conveys. It helps frame the game and how people want people to approach the game. So for me, that makes perfect sense.
So I actually really like what you just said about framing and approach to the game. What kind of experience are you hoping players will have when they play this? What kind of table talk are you hoping will emerge in groups that play this game?
Uh well, so I've been doing testing of it mostly through Tabletop Simulator because there's been this pandemic. I don't know if you've heard about this.
Right? We need a miracle at all time. Come on.
And it's been really interesting seeing the reactions because there are people who will engage with the game purely as a social dynamic stock incentive game, which is essentially the framework of the game. It's my stock game for this year. Mary told me I'd do a train game every year. I'm not doing one this year, and I would argue I'm getting away with that because she's shaking her head. But I would argue I'm getting away with that because I have a stock game coming out. So the people who approach it just as that, and there are people who will approach it more thematically, where they're trying to convince the other players, and they're reading the card text and whatnot. So I think I want people to take away from it this idea of these people taking this very seriously, but the ideas themselves maybe don't relate to everyday life. And where it, just as long as there is a consensus, is a decision, is a universal unifying doctrine, that itself was more important, especially for the growth of the church, than what that doctrine actually ended up being. Just like now there's a misconception about Nicaea that a lot of people have, where that was where they decided what books went in the Bible, which that was not the case. That was a later council.
Oh yeah.
But having a Bible that has these specific books and doesn't have these other books where this is canon and this is not, that was important for unifying things. I think before we started recording, we were talking briefly about the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which, love that book. Yeah, it's great. I can see why it's not in the Bible, but
But Jesus' child murderer is inherently a compelling narrative. So the context, just for for everybody, just for funsies, I'll add, because I'm a nerd, I can't help it. Only about 10% of people in the ancient world could read at all, and that includes people who could write their name, kind of, from what we can tell. Also, books were really expensive, so even if you had an idea of a canon, which was still very much in flux at this time. Your church might only have a letter of Paul and a gospel, like whatever you could afford and copy from somebody. One thing I really like to do with my students actually is give them excerpts from different books in the New Testament and say, this is all your church has. What are your conclusions about these issues?
Hmm.
And then I let them answer the questions, and then I make them fight because it entertains me. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right that this is very much about standardization and about coming to some sort of consensus, whatever it is. But then you have to eliminate the stuff that doesn't fit. So as
Yeah.
for wanting people to read the cards, I'm going to read a card.
Okay.
This is card XX, but perhaps I wish that you had 30 cards. I'm just going to put it that way. So this one is against kneeling. The early church stood while praying and felt that kneeling should only be reserved for penitential prayer. That is, you should only get on your knees when you've been very bad. So, this tone, I personally think this is absolutely hilarious, and I'm here for it. But I guess this also leads to larger questions, right? So
Mhm.
it's not just, do historical games need to have gravitas, but to what extent are we, as people who make things, you as a game designer, as a writer, how free do you feel to kind of poke at things that people hold sacred or could get upset about? And what do you know, how do you feel that you're asserting yourself as the author here and you get to say what you want to say?
Um, so I think as far as my comfort level with poking at things, I think it's a question of power differentials, and also perspective, I guess, because so coming from someone who comes from a Christian background, I feel more okay with poking at Christianity as a religion. I would not feel comfortable at all poking at another religion. And with Christianity being, uh, in some ways, a dominating force in world history, a very powerful institution, I feel okay punching up against that a bit. I
Yeah.
would not feel okay punching down. So I think that's like a crucial element of it because I'm not the kind of person who's just going to be irreverent for the sake of being irreverent, or I'm going to make fun of everybody. I hate that. No, I'm I'm. It's really about that again, that power differential and my relation to the thing. History. I mean, a lot of history, um, because of who it's written by and about, is heteronormative, it is cisnormative, it is patriarchal, it is white supremacist, especially for European history. Um, and there's a lot of people left by the wayside there. And I feel like any of those things, those are valid targets. you know, for what is basically some fairly gentle humor. I don't think anything in the game is particularly vicious. It's mostly like middle school giggling. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, I think the reason I asked you that question is because as I was reading through this, I was laughing so hard and I was really enjoying it. And I thought, wait a minute, if this was about something else, I would not think that this was as funny. And I think that I come to the same place where you do on that, which is that I feel a lot more ownership over this material. I mean, I'm an atheist now, but I was raised Christian. I got my PhD in ancient Christianity. You know, you I would say that regardless of where I'm at in terms of my actual beliefs in anything, I am culturally Christian and there's just no way to not be. Not growing up the way I did, not growing up here in the United States. And so, because that is the dominant narrative in our world, where we are. Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's okay to be goofy punching up.
Yeah, exactly. And the yeah, because of that perspective, because that dominance, because it, I mean, the church exists as a religious institution, but also as a worldly institution.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of my favorite cards is the usury card,
Oh yeah.
um, where I forget my precise wording there, but it essentially ends with, and the church never abused its power ever again. Um, which that's sarcasm, by the way, in case people listening are clear on that.
Indeed.
Um, and
Yeah. And I think part of what makes this game so valuable to me is that, so the church has always had an interesting, I mean, all religious organizations have a challenge when it comes to spiritual life versus physical reality and desire for success on earth in your life. But this is, I would say, this is really the first time where Christianity and secular power meet in
mhm.
such a big way. And I think that's what makes the Council of Nicaea so interesting. Interestingly, Hosseus of Cordoba, who is one of the people that does make it into this game, was anti-Arian and he's one of Constantine's emissaries. He delivered letters for Constantine across the ancient world. Later, wrote a treatise about how it's inappropriate for the empire to interfere in the affairs of the church when Constantine's son, who disagreed with him, took over. So, I mean, this game really is, there's spiritual issues at stake, but I like the way that you brought the worldliness in,
Yeah,
personally.
I wanted to center the temporal sphere, because I think, I mean, to a degree, being raised Christian and being spending way too much time like hanging out at church. A lot of it was like being taught to revere these councils, these people as something more than human,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to try to emphasize the essential humanness of them as people. And I think one thing you run into with certain institutions, certain approaches to history, is people not wanting to embrace that. There's a story about a battle George Washington was in, and I forget the battle, and I forget the exact details, but someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, and Washington came out at them, um, and whoever was describing it said that he swore like an angel, just cussing this guy out. And then there were people afterwards saying, "Well, that's not what he meant. He wasn't really cussing because angels don't swear." Like they didn't want George Washington to be someone who would say a dirty word. Um, to be a living, breathing human being. And I think that's the same. These people, Eusebius, Saint Nicholas, living, breathing human being who may or may not have thrown a punch. Yeah, and it's the way people are. I mean, there's a reason why we call biographies of saints hagiographies, where it's everything's perfect about them, and why that become a byword for this kind of uncritical look at a person's life. So yeah, that's kind of the stuff I really wanted to emphasize with this, and while trying to have a fun time and have a game that plays in 45 to 60 minutes. And I don't think anyone's done a game on this topic in this way. I know there's at least one other game about early church councils called Credo. Haven't played it.
Okay.
As far as I know, it's not a stockholding game. It doesn't have my jokes. So
So during your research, do you have a favorite? I don't want to say character because they were real people, but do you have a favorite person who made it into this game? Do you have a soft spot for one of these church fathers?
you know, I'm this is very basic of me, but I do like Saint Nicholas. You know, as a historical figure, as someone who's a little punchy, and then there's just the way, you know, the person's been transformed into something, you know, extremely secular but also fantastical is just kind of fascinating to me. You know, it's so I mean there's that, you know.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a. I'm sure there are people who argue about this, but a lot of times, we have a Saint Nicholas who, of course, then you have Saint Nick of Christmas, but the Saint Nicholas in this game was a hardcore anti-Arian who. So the stories change over the years, which is really hilarious. So at one point, he might have just open hand slapped an Arian, but the story evolves to where Saint Nicholas punches Arius in the face and like gets in trouble with Constantine for it. But like, how much trouble could it really be? So,
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan. Well, I like all just the weird miracle stories. Like, which one is the one who was like, "Oh, if your doctrine is true, make oil come from this rock," and they like performs a miracle, and the Aryans were amazed. Who was that? I'm like looking over the list of who did this. Oh yeah, Achilles of Larissa. Like did a miracle at the Aryans at the alleged moment. I love all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so much good like storytelling around it. And like this isn't even the end of the story for Arius, although that ending is special.
You know, and again, we have these stories, and this is what we have to base our knowledge on, and anyone can write any story that they want, and then people just gets repeated. I'm reminded of. Now you might be able to help me with this because I think you definitely have more knowledge of the church, and I'm really a fan rather than an expert. But there was a pope when there was this early pope. There was going to be an election, and they're trying to figure out who's going to be the pope, and they can't agree. And then some random guy walks in, and then a bird lands on his shoulder, and like, okay, he's the pope.
Oh, is that ancient? Or is that? Oh, wait! Hang on. Let me access my old comprehensive exam knowledge. Is it Fabian?
Fabian, yes, yeah, and like what? I'm pretty sure that didn't happen.
Yeah, but does it matter? Like, there's a Roman king who's a king because an eagle stole his hat.
Yeah,
I mean, we could go with that. I mean, that's as legit a way to elect somebody as anything, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure this because he was a layperson, if I remember correctly. Like,
yeah, I don't think he was in anything.
He wasn't. He's just some random guy. I mean, that's the history we have to base that on. So it's a fun thing.
Yeah, what would you even call it? Mythery? Like, I don't like myth and history combined. And the thing is that people don't like to talk about early church stories as myth. But some of these accounts really have that same ring depending on how much weight you put on the need for it to be real. So actually, there's one more thing I want to bring up before I let you go, which is, so we talked a lot about history being very heteronormative, very, very male oriented and also very white and Western. But one thing I really love about church history is that really, when you think about the Roman Empire, most people think about Italy and most people think about like, ooh, Gaul. But this conflict is really not dominated by Western
No,
theologians at all.
no, mostly Eastern theologians, and then some from like Egyptian area. And I think part of why people think of, especially lay people would think of early Christianity as like, it's Italy and Gaul, is because those other churches basically broke on. What we have is the Catholic Church that spread into Europe.
Yes.
Is what was centered in there, and the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, that was like, oh, who are those guys? And it's
Yeah, but when you ignore them, you're really, really missing out
Mhm,
because the creeds that people are saying in church every Sunday right now in the
mhm.
West are based on the arguments of people from Syria, from Palestine, from Egypt. The most Western person I can think of there is Hossis of Cordoba, who came over from Spain, and I think Arius himself may have been from Libya, from North Africa,
I believe so. Yeah,
and
I
so
mean the Pope didn't even show up.
no,
you know,
the Roman one, yeah,
yeah. Well, I'm sorry. See, this is the problem. Is
right.
is yeah, being raised now. I was raised like in a Protestant tradition, but one that was like weirdly reverent of Catholic stuff. Um, and like that's what we think of as the Pope, but there were other popes poping around. You
Yeah.
know, they
Wait,
just,
the
they
question
just
is the Pope Catholic? That is not an obvious answer as you think. And I think that there's something really nice about having a game that calls attention to these people that maybe we forget sometimes.
Mhm.
Without whom we would not be what we are now, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
Any last comments about this game?
It'll be coming out in November during the holiday sale. Um, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun time, and it's like my big prestige game of the year, to do one every year. And this is the first of the big prestige games where I feel like I can have a sense of humor about it. Because previously it was, This Guilty Land, The Vote, Westphalia, which is a 6-player only negotiation game, which has a little bit of snark, but it's mostly trying to take it seriously. And so this is like this is a lot less stressful than those games were for me. Yeah.
And I think I want to emphasize before we go, like, I'm coming to this with a tremendous sense of affection and love for the subject matter, and that's something that I sense from you as well. Like, you can joke about it because you love it.
Yeah, exactly.
So y'all, Mabel, source of sassy church history. I'm all about it. So where can we find you on the internet?
On the internet, I mostly hang out on Twitter. My ad is Amabel Holland, AMABELHOLLAND. And then Mary runs the Hollandspiel account, is HOLLANDSPIELE, and where you find more about our company and such. And that's pretty much where we hang out on, other than Hollandspiel.com. You can buy games from us. We'll sell them to you.
Which I can personally recommend you do in several of my recommendations. All right, so I can be found anywhere on the internet as Beyond Solitaire. Mabel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Happy gaming, everybody.